The alarm screamed through the corridors of New Haven Colony, and Jiho Park knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. He had heard warning sirens before during drills, but this sound carried a different tone. This was real. Jiho ran from his office toward the control center, his heart pounding in his chest. Around him, colonists rushed in every direction, some heading to shelter points, others frozen in fear. Children cried in their parents' arms. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the metal walls. "Report!" Jiho shouted as he burst into the control room. His voice was steady despite the chaos around him. He had been a military officer once, many years ago on Earth. Those instincts never truly left a person. Yoon Kim sat at the communications console, his young face pale and sweating. His fingers moved frantically across the controls, pulling up screen after screen of data. "Sir, we have multiple contacts on the outer sensors." They came out of nowhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "What kind of contacts?" Jiho demanded, moving to stand behind Hyun's chair. He stared at the display, watching red dots multiply across the screen like a spreading disease. "Biological signatures. Large ones?" Hyun's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, I think they're Kravik." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the room went silent. The Kravik swarm was known throughout the galaxy as destroyers, creatures that consumed everything in their path. Entire colonies had vanished when the Kravik arrived. There were no negotiations, no mercy, no survivors. Jiho felt ice form in his stomach, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would kill them faster than any alien attack. "Raise shields. Get everyone to the central habitat dome. How long until they reach us?" "Minutes, sir. They're moving fast." Hyun looked up at Jiho with terrified eyes. "What do we do?" Before Jiho could answer, the entire station shook violently. The lights went out completely for 3 long seconds before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Another impact followed, then another. The Kravik had begun their attack. "Send a distress call," Jiho ordered, gripping the console to steady himself as another explosion rocked the station. "Send it on all coalition frequencies. Tell them we need immediate assistance." Hyun's fingers flew across his controls. "Sending now, sir." "Maximum power on all bands." Jiho turned to the others in the control room. "Everyone else get to the dome now, that's an order." They hesitated, looking at him with frightened faces. "Go," he shouted, and they ran. In the corridor outside, Jiho found Minji Kang directing a group of colonists toward safety. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical bun, and she carried a heavy toolbox in one hand. When she saw Jiho, she ran to him. "The outer sections are breaching," Minji said quickly, her engineer's mind already working on solutions. "We've lost habitats C through F. The Kravik are cutting through the hull like it's paper." "Can we seal the inner doors?" Jiho asked, taking her hand as they hurried toward the central dome together. "Already done, but it won't hold them long." "These creatures," Minji shook her head. "I've seen the reports. They're relentless. The central habitat dome was designed to be the last refuge in case of disaster. It had its own power supply, air recyclers, and could theoretically support the colony's population for weeks. As Jiho and Minji entered, they saw nearly 300 people crowded inside. Families huddled together, old and young, all wearing the same expression of terror. Jiho climbed onto a raised platform where everyone could see him. He knew he had to say something, had to give them hope even if he felt none himself. "Listen to me," he called out, and slowly the frightened voices quieted. "We've sent a distress call to the Galactic Coalition. Help is coming. We just need to hold out until they arrive." "What if they don't come in time?" someone shouted from the crowd. "They will," Jiho said firmly, though doubt gnawed at his heart. "The Coalition doesn't abandon its people." He wanted to believe his own words. He had to believe them. Back in the control room, which was now inside the dome's protected area, Hyun monitored the communications system. His equipment showed that the distress call had been received by Coalition headquarters. The automated response came back within an hour. Message received. Situation under review. But as the hours passed, no fleet arrived. No rescue ships appeared on their sensors. Hyun sent the distress call again and again, each time more desperate than the last. The Kravik continued their assault, systematically destroying the outer sections of the colony and moving steadily inward. Minji worked with a team of volunteers to reinforce the dome's shields. They rerouted power from non-essential systems, giving them a few more hours at best. Through the transparent sections of the dome, they could see the Kravik in the distance. Massive insect-like creatures with bodies covered in black chitinous armor. They moved with horrible purpose, tearing through metal and machinery with blade-like claws. On the second day, an official response finally came from the coalition. Hyun read the message with shaking hands, then looked up at Jiho with tears in his eyes. Sir, they're not coming. Jiho felt the world tilt beneath him. What? The coalition reviewed our situation. They say New Haven is too remote and the Kravik force is too large. They've classified the rescue as strategically unfeasible. Hyun's voice broke. They've abandoned us. Jiho stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Around the dome, people who had overheard began to cry. Parents held their children tighter. Some colonists simply sat down where they stood, all hope draining from their faces. But Hyun wasn't finished. His fingers moved across his console with sudden determination. Sir, I have an idea. Before the outer relays were destroyed, I noticed something. One of the old communication arrays from before New Haven joined the coalition network. It's still active. What kind of array? Jiho asked, moving closer. An Earth military channel, from the old expansion days. It's outdated, but it still works. Hyun looked up at Jiho. I can bounce our distress call through it. Send it directly to Earth. Earth is weeks away, Minji said quietly. We have maybe 70 hours before the shields fail completely. I know, Hyun said. But what else can we do? At least we'd be trying. Jiho thought of Earth, the world he'd left decades ago to start a new life on the frontier. He thought of the military he'd once served, the oath he'd sworn. He remembered the words, "We leave no one behind." Do it, Jiho said. Send the message to Earth. Hyun worked quickly, his fingers dancing across the controls. He encoded the distress call with old Earth military protocols, added their exact coordinates, and fired it off through the ancient relay system. The message disappeared into space, racing toward a homeworld that might not even care about a distant mining colony. As the third day began, the Kravik pressed closer. The dome's shields flickered and weakened. Power reserves dropped steadily. Jiho stood watch through the long hours, refusing to sleep while his people were in danger. He thought about the message traveling through space. He wondered if anyone on Earth would receive it, and if they did, would they come? Could they come in time? The colonists prepared for the worst. They gathered what weapons they could improvise. Minji showed people how to seal interior doors, creating fallback positions. Parents recorded final messages for relatives on distant worlds just in case. Jiho addressed them again as the shields dropped to 30%. I don't know if help will come, he admitted, his voice rough with exhaustion. But I know this, we don't give up. Not while we draw breath. If this is our last stand, we make it count. We protect each other. We stay human. The colonists nodded, drawing strength from each other. They were scared, but they weren't broken. Not yet. Outside the dome, the Kravik gathered in larger numbers. Their chittering calls echoed through the thin atmosphere. They were preparing for a final assault. Inside, Hyun stared at his console, hoping against hope for a response from Earth. The screen remained dark, silent, empty. Night fell on New Haven colony, though day and night meant little in space. Jiho held Minji close, both of them exhausted beyond words. Around them, families slept in shifts, trying to rest before the battle they knew was coming. The shields were failing, the Kravik were gathering, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. All they could do was wait and hope that someone somewhere had heard their cry for help. The message arrived at Earth Stellar Defense Command at 3 a.m, Earth Standard Time. A junior communications officer named Bora noticed it first. The signal came through an old military channel that barely anyone monitored anymore. But the protocols embedded in the message were unmistakable. This was a legitimate distress call. Bora's hands trembled as she routed the message to her supervisor, then to command staff, and within 20 minutes, it had reached the desk of Admiral Taejin Ro himself. Taejin sat in his office high above the Pacific Ocean, the Earth spinning slowly below the orbital station. He was a man in his 60s, with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too many battles. He played the message 3 times, listening to every word of the desperate plea from New Haven colony. 300 people, under attack by the Kravik swarm. The coalition had refused to help. Taijin's jaw tightened as he read the coalition's response that had been included in the data packet. Strategically unfeasible. That's what they'd called it. The lives of 300 human beings were merely unfeasible to them. He picked up his communicator and pressed the emergency alert. All senior staff to the command center. Immediate. Within 30 minutes, the room was filled. Taijin stood at the head of the table, surrounded by the best minds in Earth's military. Captain Yuna Choi was there, commander of the ESS Indomitable, Earth's flagship. Commander Minho Lee represented the fighter corps. Dr. Sora Nam had been pulled from her bed to provide expertise on the Kruvik. Taijin played the message for everyone. The room fell silent as they listened to Hyun's voice, professional but unable to hide his fear. When it ended, Taijin looked at each face around the table. The coalition says it's unfeasible to rescue these people, Taijin said quietly. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room could hear the steel beneath it. I want options. Can we reach them in time? Yuna Choi pulled up a star map, her fingers moving quickly across the display. New Haven is in the Velrun system, 12 light-years from Earth. With our fastest ships using maximum FTL speed, we could reach them in 60 hours. The message says they have maybe 70 hours before their shields fail completely, Minho added, leaning forward to study the map. It's possible, but the timing is extremely tight. What about the Kruvik? Taijin asked, turning to Dr. Sora Nam. Sora had brought up data files on her tablet, images and reports from previous Kruvik attacks. The Kruvik swarm operates on hive intelligence. They're extremely aggressive and their numbers are overwhelming. They've destroyed colonies 3 times the size of New Haven. She paused, looking troubled. But they have weaknesses. They rely on command organisms, larger Kruvik that coordinate the swarm. Kill those, and the rest become disorganized. How many ships would we need? Taijin asked. Yuna studied the tactical displays, running calculations in her head. To fight a Kruvik force large enough to threaten a colony? We'd need significant force. Multiple capital ships, destroyer support, fighter wings. Sir, we'd need to deploy at least 1/3 of our fleet. The room went quiet. Deploying that much of Earth's military was unprecedented. It would leave Earth's home system with reduced defenses. It would require approval from the civilian government, and it would be done without coalition authorization. Admiral, one of the junior officers spoke up hesitantly. If we do this without coalition approval, there could be political consequences. Taijin turned to look at the young officer. 300 human beings are going to die if we don't act. You want to tell me that politics matter more than their lives? The officer looked down, unable to meet Taijin's gaze. I swore an oath when I joined this military. Taijin continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. That oath didn't say I'd only help people when it was politically convenient. It didn't say I'd abandon our own because someone far away decided they weren't worth saving. He straightened, his decision made. We're going to New Haven. We're going to save those people. And if the coalition doesn't like it, they can file a complaint after we bring our people home. Yuna Choi smiled slightly. Give the order, Admiral. The Indomitable will be ready to launch in 6 hours. I'll have my fighter wings prepped in 4, Minho said, already standing to leave. Get me everything you have on Kruvik tactics, Taijin told Sora. I want to know how to hurt them. The room exploded into activity. Officers ran to their stations. Communication channels lit up as orders went out across Earth's military network. The massive war machine of humanity began to move. In the shipyards above Earth, crews swarmed over vessels that had been on routine patrol status. The Indomitable, a massive dreadnought nearly 2 kilometers long, began its launch preparations. Smaller destroyers and support ships aligned in formation. In the fighter bays, pilots ran to their craft while mechanics loaded weapons and checked systems. Minho Lee stood in the briefing room with his squadron leaders, going over attack patterns. The Kruvik are tough, but they're not invincible, he told them, pulling up holographic displays of previous battles. They rely on overwhelming numbers. We counter that with precision. We hit their command organisms hard and fast, create chaos in their ranks. How many fighters are we taking? One of the pilots asked. All of them, Minho said grimly. Every fighter we can fit on the carriers. We're going to need every weapon we have. Meanwhile, Yuna Choi walked through the corridors of the Indomitable, checking preparations personally. She stopped to speak with crew members, asking about their readiness, making sure everyone understood the mission. These were people's lives at stake. Her people. Human lives. In engineering, technicians installed experimental weapons that had been in testing. A graviton beam, a focused gravity weapon that could tear apart molecular bonds. It had never been used in real combat before, but if the Kravik were as tough as reports suggested, they would need every advantage. Tajin contacted Earth's government, speaking directly with the president. The conversation was brief but intense. Political leaders were nervous about such a large military action without coalition approval. But when news of the situation leaked to the public, the response was overwhelming. Across Earth, people watched. The news broadcasts showing the fleet preparing to launch. Social media exploded with support. Save New Haven became the most used phrase on the networks. People gathered in public spaces to watch, many in tears. The message was clear. Earth takes care of its own. The president gave her approval. Bring them home, Admiral. 50 hours after receiving the distress call, the Third Fleet was ready. 12 capital ships, including the Indomitable, 40 destroyers, 150 support vessels, 5,000 strike fighters spread across multiple carriers. It was the largest military force Earth had ever assembled beyond its home system. Tajin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable next to Yuna Choi. Through the massive view screen, he could see the other ships of the fleet spread out in formation. So many vessels, so many people, all committed to saving 300 colonists on the edge of known space. Fleet reports ready, Admiral, Yuna said crisply. Tajin took a deep breath. This was it. Once they jumped to FTL, there was no turning back. They would arrive at New Haven with just hours to spare, assuming everything went perfectly. Any delay, any problem, and they would arrive too late. But Tajin had never left anyone behind in his life. He wasn't about to start now. Open a channel, he ordered. All frequencies, including the old military band. I want this message to reach New Haven. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, sir. Tajin spoke clearly, knowing his words would be recorded, broadcast, remembered. To the people of New Haven Colony, this is Admiral Tajin Rowe of Earth Stellar Defense Command. We have received your distress call. Hold on. Earth is coming. We will not abandon you. I repeat, Earth is coming. Stay strong. Help is on the way. He paused, then continued. All ships, this is Admiral Rowe. Our mission is simple. Reach New Haven, destroy the Kravik threat and bring our people home safely. We don't leave anyone behind. Not today. Not ever. A chorus of acknowledgments came back from every ship in the fleet. Thousands of voices united in purpose. Captain Choi, Tajin said formally, take us to FTL. Maximum speed. Destination. Velrin system. Yuna's hands moved across her controls. All ships prepare for jump, FTL in 30 seconds. The countdown began. Around Earth, millions of people watched their screens as the fleet prepared to depart. In living rooms and offices, on street corners and in schools, humanity held its breath. 10 seconds, Yuna announced. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump. The space around the fleet rippled and tore. Reality bent as the ships engaged their FTL drives simultaneously. One by one, the vessels disappeared into hyperspace, leaving trails of distorted light behind them. The fleet was gone, racing through dimensions beyond normal space, hurtling toward a distant colony at speeds that defied physics. Inside each ship, crews worked at their stations, checking weapons, running drills, preparing for the battle they knew was coming. In the Indomitable's ready room, fighter pilots played the recording of Hyun's distress call, listening to the fear in his voice. It made the mission real. These weren't just abstract numbers or strategic objectives. These were real people, scared and alone, waiting for help that might never come. L. The shields were at 15% when Hyun detected the first anomaly on his sensors. He had been staring at the same displays for 3 days straight, watching the Kravik gather, watching the power levels drop, waiting for the end. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but something on the screen made him sit up straight. "Sir," he called out hoarsely to Jiho, who was helping reinforce a weak section of the dome. "I'm getting strange readings on the long-range sensors." Jiho hurried over, Minji close behind him. They had maybe 12 hours left before the shields failed completely. The Kravik had been probing the defenses constantly, testing for weak points. It was only a matter of time. "What kind of readings?" Jiho asked, though he tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous now. Hyun's fingers moved across his console, trying to clean up the signal. FTL signatures. Multiple ones. Very large. He looked up at Jiho with wide eyes. "Sir, I think it's a fleet." "A big one." Jiho felt his heart skip. "Can you identify them?" Hyun worked frantically, adjusting frequencies, filtering out interference. The colony's sensors were damaged, making it hard to get clear data. But slowly, signatures began to resolve on the screen. One large vessel, then another, then dozens more. "I'm reading 12 capital-class ships," Hyun said, his voice shaking. 40 smaller warships, and hundreds of support craft. "Sir, this is the biggest fleet I've ever seen. Who are they?" Minji asked, gripping Jiho's arm. "Did the coalition come after all?" Hyun enlarged the scanner display, focusing on the lead ship's signature. He ran it through the identification database. Though his hands were trembling so badly he could barely work the controls. The computer processed the data, comparing it against thousands of known vessel types. A match appeared on the screen. "They're Earth ships," Hyun whispered.
The lead vessel is the ESS Indomitable.
"It's an Earth dreadnought." He looked up at Jiho with tears streaming down his face. "Earth came for us." They actually came. For a moment no one moved. The words seemed impossible. Earth was so far away. But then Jiho grabbed the communication console. "Broadcast this on all frequencies," he ordered. "Tell them our situation. Tell them we have maybe 12 hours left." Throughout the dome, word spread like wildfire. People who had been sitting in despair stood up. Parents who had been preparing to die held their children and cried with relief. Earth had come. They weren't abandoned after all. Outside the dome, the Kravik had also detected the new arrivals. The swarm began to shift, thousands of bioships turning away from the colony to face this new threat. They had destroyed many species before. They would destroy these newcomers too. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Yuna Choi watched the tactical display as the fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Velrin system. The sight before them was sobering. The colony of New Haven appeared as a small cluster of structures in the asteroid belt, surrounded by a seething mass of Kravik vessels. "Get me a count," Yuna ordered crisply. "Sensors reading approximately 3,000 Kravik bioships," the tactical officer reported, ranging from fighter-class to cruiser-sized. "Multiple large command vessels detected. Ma'am, there's also something else. Several massive signatures hiding in the outer asteroids. Could be Hive Queens." Yuna felt a chill. Hive Queens were the ultimate Kravik command organisms, massive creatures the size of small moons. If those were present, this was a full-scale invasion force, not just a raid. "Status on the colony?" she asked. "Shields at 14% and falling. They have hours at most. Then we don't have time for caution." Yuna opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is the Indomitable. We have one objective, save those colonists. Nothing else matters. Execute Battle Plan Omega." Across the fleet, ships moved into position. Battle Plan Omega was designed for exactly this scenario. Overwhelming enemy numbers with limited time. It was aggressive, brutal, and risky, but it was their best chance. The 12 capital ships formed a defensive wall, positioning themselves between the Kravik swarm and the colony. Their massive railguns began to charge, building up enormous amounts of energy. Behind them, destroyers spread out in attack formations, fighters launched from carriers in waves, thousands of small craft forming a deadly cloud. The Kravik swarm detected the formation and surged forward. They had no fear, no hesitation. The swarm simply attacked, driven by their hive intelligence to consume and destroy. From a distance, it looked like a black tide rushing toward the human fleet. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, the tactical officer announced. Yuna gripped her command chair. This was it. All ships fire at will. The space between the two forces erupted in violence. The capital ships fired their railguns simultaneously, sending massive projectiles through space at relativistic speeds. Each shot carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear weapon. Where they hit, Kravik bioships simply disintegrated, torn apart by the incredible force. But the Kravik kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. They fired back with bioorganic weapons, acidic projectiles, and explosive spores that splattered against the Earthship's shields. Min-Ho Lee led his fighter wing straight into the heart of the swarm. His squadron moved like a single organism, each pilot knowing exactly where the others were. Their maneuvers practiced 1,000 times. They targeted the larger Kravik vessels, the ones coordinating the attack. Phoenix Leader to all wings, Min-Ho called over the comm. Focus fire on the command ships. Hit them with everything you have. Plasma torpedoes streaked through space, impacting against the thick armor of Kravik command vessels. Explosions blossomed in the darkness. One large bioship broke apart, its insides exposed to vacuum. The smaller Kravik near it scattered briefly, confused without their coordinator. It's working, one of Min-Ho's pilots shouted. Taking out the commanders disrupts them. Keep it up, Min-Ho ordered, spinning his fighter to avoid a cluster of Kravik interceptors. Don't let up for a second. On the Indomitable, Yuna monitored dozens of tactical displays simultaneously. The battle was going better than expected, but it was still brutal. The Kravik were taking horrific losses, but they didn't care. They just kept attacking. Ma'am, we're taking heavy fire on the port side, an officer reported. Shields holding at 70%. Reroute power from non-essential systems, Yuna ordered. She opened a channel to engineering. How's our special weapon? The chief engineer's voice came back. The graviton beam is charged and ready, Captain. Just give us a target. Yuna studied the battlefield looking for the right opportunity. The graviton beam was powerful but had limited range. They would only get one good shot before it needed to recharge. She needed to make it count. A cluster of particularly large Kravik command vessels caught her attention. They were hanging back from the main battle, coordinating multiple swarm groups. If she could take them out simultaneously. Helm, bring us about. Heading 273 Mark 5, full speed. The Indomitable turned ponderously, its massive bulk accelerating toward the enemy command cluster. Yuna felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet as the engines pushed the ship faster than it was designed to go. Alarms sounded as they penetrated deeper into the Kravik formation. Captain, we're getting surrounded, her tactical officer warned. I know. Hold course. Yuna watched the range counter drop. Engineering, prepare to fire on my mark. The Kravik realized what the Indomitable was doing and swarmed toward it. Dozens of bioships latched onto the hull, their acidic secretions eating at the armor. The ship shuddered under the assault. Shields at 40%. Hold, Yuna commanded, her voice ice cold. The range counter hit the optimal firing distance. Fire! The graviton beam weapon activated. From the Indomitable's bow, an invisible beam of focused gravitational force lanced out. Where it struck, reality itself seemed to bend. The Kravik command vessels didn't explode or burn. They simply came apart. Their molecular bonds torn asunder by forces they couldn't resist. One moment they existed, the next they were expanding clouds of disconnected atoms. The effect on the swarm was immediate. Thousands of Kravik suddenly lost coordination. The organized attack formations dissolved into chaos. Ships flew randomly, colliding with each other, no longer sure what to do. All ships press the attack, Yuna ordered. Hit them while they're confused. The Earth fleet surged forward. Fighters swooped in, picking off Kravik vessels that flew erratically without guidance. Destroyers formed kill zones, their overlapping fire cutting down anything that entered their range. The capital ships methodically eliminated the larger threats. But the battle was far from over. From the outer asteroids, 3 massive forms began to move. The Hive Queens had detected the threat and were coming to restore order. Each Hive Queen was larger than Earth's biggest capital ships. Their bodies were ancient, having survived countless battles across centuries. They emitted powerful pheromone signals that reached across the battlefield, calling the scattered Kravik back to order. Min-Ho saw the Hive Queens approaching and understood immediately how dangerous they were. All wings, we need to take down those queens. He led his squadron toward the nearest queen, but the creature was heavily protected. Thousands of Kravik fighters swarmed around it, forming a living shield. Min-Ho's first attack run barely scratched the queen's thick armor before his squadron had to break off, pursued by overwhelming numbers. The three Hive Queens moved through space like ancient gods of destruction, their massive bodies dwarfing even the largest human ships. Each one had lived for centuries, had consumed dozens of worlds, had never known defeat. They emitted chemical signals so powerful they could be detected by instruments, reorganizing the scattered Kravik swarm back into a coordinated force. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Taejin Ro watched the tactical display with calculating eyes. He had transferred his command to the flagship once the battle began, and now he faced the most critical decision of the engagement. "Captain Choi," he said into the comm, "what's the evacuation status?" Yuna's voice came back from the surface, steady despite the chaos around her. "We've loaded 200 colonists so far. Another 100 still waiting. We need 30 more minutes, Admiral." Taejin looked at the display showing the Hive Queens advancing. 30 minutes was an eternity in a battle like this. But those colonists had waited days for rescue. He wasn't going to lose them now. "You have your 30 minutes, Captain," Taejin said. "We'll keep the Kravik busy." He switched channels to address the entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Ro. We are authorized for Protocol Ragnarok. Remove all combat restrictions. Full weapons free. Show these creatures what humanity is capable of." Protocol Ragnarok meant one thing: total war. Every weapon, every tactic, no holding back. Across the fleet, ships activated weapon systems that had been kept in reserve. Energy signatures spiked as power cores were pushed past safe limits. The battle intensified to a level of violence that would have been unthinkable minutes before. The 12 capital ships formed a moving fortress, their railguns firing non-stop. Each shot punched through multiple Kravik vessels. The space between the fleets became a graveyard of shattered bioships and debris. Minho Lee regrouped his fighter wings for another assault on the Hive Queens. His squadron had taken losses, but the pilots who remained were the best humanity had. They flew with a precision and skill that the Kravik couldn't match. "Phoenix Squadron, form up on me," Minho ordered. "We're going for the Eastern Queen. Tiger and Dragon Squadrons, you take the Western one. Falcon Squadron, keep the fighters off our backs." "Sir, the Queens have heavy protection," one pilot objected. "We tried before and couldn't penetrate." "That was before Protocol Ragnarok," Minho replied grimly. "Now we're using the heavy ordnance. The stuff they don't let us touch in normal operations." His fighter's weapons display showed new options. Experimental munitions that had been locked away until now. Antimatter torpedoes, quantum disruption missiles, weapons that could crack a moon if used improperly. "Follow my lead," Minho said, "and watch for the backlash. These things have a kick." Phoenix Squadron dove toward the Eastern Hive Queen, weaving through clouds of Kravik fighters. The enemy ships tried to intercept, but Falcon Squadron hit them from the side, plasma cannons tearing through their organic armor. The path cleared just long enough for Minho to get his targeting lock. "Antimatter torpedoes away," Minho announced, firing 6 of the devastating weapons in rapid succession. The torpedoes streaked toward the Hive Queen, their drives leaving trails of distorted spacetime. The Queen tried to evade, but something that massive couldn't move quickly. The first torpedo struck her forward section, and the antimatter warhead detonated. The explosion was soundless in the vacuum of space, but it was visible across the entire battlefield. A sphere of pure energy expanded from the impact point, consuming everything within its radius. When it faded, a massive crater had been torn in the Hive Queen's body, exposing internal organs to space. The Queen screamed, though it was a scream of chemicals and electromagnetic pulses rather than sound. The pain signal was so strong that nearby Kravik fighters simply stopped functioning, their nervous systems overwhelmed. "Hit her again," Minho shouted.
"Don't let up."
The other squadrons launched their attacks. More torpedoes, more missiles, a sustained barrage that no living thing could withstand. The Eastern Hive Queen thrashed wildly, her massive body breaking apart as explosions rippled through her length. Finally, with a last burst of desperate signals, she died. Her body went limp and began to drift. Just another piece of debris in the battle. The Kravik forces near her position fell into complete chaos. Without their Queen's guidance, they scattered in all directions, easy targets for the human ships. "1 down," Minho reported. 2 to go. But the other 2 Hive Queens had seen their sister's death, and they adapted. They withdrew deeper into the asteroid field, surrounding themselves with thousands of Kravik defenders. They weren't going to make it easy. On New Haven's surface, the evacuation continued at a frantic pace. Sergeant Daeun-oh coordinated the Marine squads as they loaded colonists onto the transports. She was a veteran of a dozen combat operations, but she'd never felt pressure like this. These weren't soldiers. These were families, children, elderly people who had been through 3 days of hell. "Keep moving," Daeun called out, her voice calm despite the battle raging overhead. "Don't stop. We've got you." Jiho helped carry an elderly woman to the transport, her legs too weak to walk after days of fear and poor nutrition. Minji was right behind him with a group of children, making sure none were left behind. "That's everyone from Sector 3, Minji reported. 50 more from Sector 4, then we're done." Above them, a Kravik fighter broke through the defensive perimeter and dove toward the evacuation site. Before it could attack, a human fighter intercepted it, destroying the enemy ship in a brilliant explosion. Pieces of the Kravik rained down onto the surface, but far enough away to pose no danger. "Thank you, whoever you are," Jiho muttered, looking up at the stars. In space, the Indomitable had engaged the Western Hive Queen in direct combat. The two Titans traded devastating blows, each trying to destroy the other. The Queen's bioweapons splattered against the Indomitable's shields, acidic compounds eating at the protective fields. In return, the ship's railguns hammered at the Queen's armor, each impact shaking her massive body. Taejin watched the shield strength indicators dropping steadily. They couldn't sustain this exchange for long. "How long until the graviton beam recharges?" 3 minutes, Admiral," the engineering officer reported. "We don't have 3 minutes." Taejin studied the tactical display, looking for an advantage. The Queen was powerful, but she was also old and confident. She fought like someone who had never lost before. That would be her mistake. "Helm, emergency thrust on my mark. Navigation, prepare a collision course." His bridge crew turned to stare at him. "Sir?" the helmsman asked uncertainly. "You heard me. We're going to ram her." Taejin's voice was calm, as if he'd suggested something routine. "Calculate the optimal impact point. Somewhere that will hurt." The Indomitable suddenly accelerated, pushing its engines far beyond safe limits. The Queen, surprised by the maneuver, tried to evade. But the human ship was faster than she expected, and the distance closed rapidly. At the last second, Taejin ordered, "Full reverse thrust." The ship didn't actually ram the Queen. Instead, it stopped just meters from her body, close enough that the engine wash from the massive ship's thrusters poured directly onto the Queen's organic armor. The superheated plasma from the engines cooked the Queen's surface, burning through layers of protection. The Queen thrashed in agony, trying to pull away. But the Indomitable stayed with her, its engines continuing to burn. And while the Queen was distracted by pain, Minho's fighters swooped in from above, hitting her exposed ventral surface with everything they had. The Western Hive Queen lasted another 30 seconds before her body gave out. She died in fire and fury, killed by human ingenuity and determination. 2 down, Taejin said quietly. 1 to go. The last Hive Queen, seeing both her sisters dead, made a choice. She sent out a signal that pulled every remaining Kravik to her position. Thousands of bioships formed a massive sphere around her, a living shield. If the humans wanted her, they would have to go through her entire remaining army. It was a smart tactic. But she had underestimated human resolve. Taejin looked at the display showing all 300 colonists finally loaded onto transports, lifting off from New Haven's surface. They were safe. The mission was accomplished, but Taejin wasn't done. He wasn't just here to rescue colonists. He was here to send a message to the galaxy about what happened when you threatened humanity's people. "All ships," he broadcast. "The colonists are secure. Now we finish this. Converge on the last Queen, no survivors. I want every single Kravik destroyed." The entire Earth fleet turned as one, focusing on the last concentration of enemy forces. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. The human ships surrounded the Kravik sphere and systematically destroyed it, layer by layer. The destroyers created overlapping fields of fire that nothing could pass through. The fighters penetrated the gaps and struck from within. The capital ship's heavy weapons punched through the formation, creating holes that were immediately exploited. The Kravik fought with desperate fury, but they were facing an enemy that would not stop, would not slow, would not show mercy. For every human ship damaged, 2 more took its position. For every fighter lost, 3 more appeared to take its place. Minho led the final assault personally, his squadron driving straight toward. The news reached the Galactic Coalition headquarters exactly 3 days after the Battle of Velran System. A junior analyst was reviewing routine intelligence reports when she noticed something unusual. Multiple sources confirmed that an Earth fleet had engaged and destroyed a major Kravik swarm, the same swarm that the Coalition had deemed too dangerous to confront. The analyst forwarded the report up the chain of command. Within hours it reached the High Council chamber, a massive circular room where representatives from 47 species gathered to govern galactic affairs. Counselor Vex, a tall reptilian being from Soros Prime, read the report 3 times before he believed it. "This must be a mistake," he said to his aide. "Earth doesn't have this kind of military capability." "The data has been verified, Counselor," his aide replied nervously. Multiple independent sensors recorded the battle. Earth deployed 12 capital ships, 40 destroyers, and over 100 support vessels. They completely destroyed a Kravik force of over 3,000 ships. Vex felt his scales prickle with unease. Earth was supposed to be a minor member world, a frontier species of little importance. When had they built such a massive fleet? And more troubling, why had they kept it hidden? The council meeting that followed was chaotic. Representatives shouted over each other, some demanding explanations, others calling for Earth to be sanctioned. The noise level was unprecedented in the usually orderly chamber. Counselor Rin, a floating energy being from the core worlds, called for order. "We need to address this systematically. First, Earth deployed military force without coalition authorization. Second, they possess weapons capabilities we were unaware of. Third, they engaged in a rescue operation that we explicitly declined. Each of these actions must be discussed. Earth had no right to act without our approval," Counselor Thex declared. He was the insectoid from the Outer Rim, and his voice buzzed with anger. What if their attack had provoked the Kravik into retaliating against Coalition worlds? "The Kravik are destroyed," another counselor pointed out. "Earth eliminated the threat entirely." "That's beside the point," Thex insisted. "The principle of coalition authority must be maintained." What the counselors didn't know yet was that recordings of the battle were spreading across the galaxy. Not just dry tactical reports, but actual footage from New Haven's sensors. Images of human Marines carrying children to safety, while a massive battle raged overhead. Sound recordings of Admiral Tajin Ro's promise, "Earth is coming. We will not abandon you." On 1,000 worlds, people watched these recordings and asked questions. If their colony was attacked, would the Coalition come? Or would they also be deemed strategically unfeasible? The questions made Coalition leadership very uncomfortable. "We need to summon Earth's representatives," Counselor Vex decided. "They must answer for their actions." 2 weeks later, Admiral Tajin Ro arrived at Coalition headquarters. He came alone without lawyers or diplomatic staff. He wore his military uniform, the medals on his chest representing 50 years of service. He stood in the center of the council chamber while representatives from 47 worlds stared down at him. "Admiral Ro," Counselor Vex began formally, "you are here to answer for unauthorized military action in the Velrin system. Earth deployed a significant military force without coalition approval and engaged in combat operations that could have had far-reaching consequences. How do you respond to these charges?" Tajin stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked around the chamber at each counselor in turn before speaking. "I respond by presenting evidence," he said calmly. On the chamber's central display, a recording appeared. It was Hyun's original distress call from New Haven, his voice desperate as he described the Kravik attack. Then the Coalition's response appeared. "Situation under review." And finally, the official rejection, strategically unfeasible. The chamber went very quiet. 300 people, Tajin said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. 300 human beings, including 73 children, called for help. They sent that distress call to you, to this council, trusting that the Coalition protects its members. He paused. You rejected them. You decided their lives weren't worth the risk. "Admiral, you must understand," Counselor Rin began. "I understand perfectly," Tajin interrupted, which caused murmurs throughout the chamber. No one interrupted a counselor. "I understand that you made a calculation. You weighed 300 lives against the difficulty of mounting a rescue, and you decided those lives were expendable." His voice hardened. "Earth does not make those calculations. Earth does not abandon its people because saving them is difficult." He pulled up another display, this one showing footage from the evacuation. Marines in powered armor protecting civilians, transports lifting off while the battle raged, children being carried to safety. These are the people you abandoned, Tajin said. Every single one of them is alive today because Earth chose to act. We deployed our third fleet, we risked our ships and personnel, and we brought our people home. He looked directly at Counselor Vex. If that's a violation of coalition rules, then your rules are wrong. The chamber erupted. Some counselors shouted their agreement, others their outrage. Through it all, Tajin stood calmly, waiting for order to be restored. What the council didn't know was that this entire session was being broadcast. Not officially, but someone had ensured the feeds leaked. Across the galaxy, billions watched Earth's admiral stand before the council and defend his actions, and they listened to every word. Counselor Thex tried to regain control. Your personal feelings are irrelevant, Admiral. The law is clear. You had no authority to deploy your fleet without coalition approval. Then change your law, Tajin replied simply. Because Earth will continue to protect its people and its allies with or without your permission. That is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. You cannot simply ignore coalition authority. Thex buzzed angrily. Can't we? Tajin asked mildly. What will you do? Sanction us? Expel us from the coalition? He gestured to the recordings still playing on the displays. Go ahead. See how the galaxy responds when you punish the one power willing to actually protect people. Counselor Rin, more politically astute than Thex, understood the trap Earth had created. If the coalition sanctioned Earth, they would appear to be punishing them for saving lives. The political fallout would be devastating, but if they did nothing, they were admitting that coalition authority could be ignored. This matter requires further discussion, Rin said carefully. The council will recess to debate our response. As Tajin left the chamber, he was met by unexpected visitors. Representatives from smaller worlds, frontier colonies, and marginalized species. They lined the corridor, and as he passed, they began to applaud. Quietly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed through the halls of coalition headquarters. An elderly diplomat from a mining world stopped Tajin, tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply. You showed everyone that someone still cares. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented happened. Dozens of worlds approached Earth with requests for defense agreements. They didn't want to rely on the coalition anymore. They wanted Earth's promise of protection. Admiral Tajin found himself in the middle of a diplomatic revolution he never intended to start. In his temporary quarters on the coalition station, he met with representatives from across the galaxy. A delegate from the Outer Rim colonies arrived first. Our worlds are too remote for the coalition to care about, she explained. We've watched your ships patrol near our borders. We want a formal alliance. If we call for help, will Earth come? Tajin thought carefully before answering. If you are our ally, we will come. But understand what that means. We expect the same from you. Earth protects its friends, and we expect our friends to stand with us. That's acceptable, the delegate said immediately. More than acceptable. That's what an alliance should be. More delegations followed, small species that had been ignored by the larger powers, frontier worlds that felt abandoned, mining colonies, research outposts, trading stations, all of them wanted the same thing, the assurance that someone would come if they called. Back on Earth, the government struggled to keep up with the diplomatic demands. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which had been a small department handling minor issues, suddenly became one of the most important offices in human government. Meanwhile, the Galactic Coalition Council held closed sessions, trying to decide what to do about Earth. The debates grew heated. Some counselors wanted to make an example of Earth, to show that coalition authority must be respected. Others argued that would be disastrous. Finally, after 2 weeks of debate, Counselor Rin proposed a compromise. Earth would be granted special military provisions. They could deploy forces for rescue and defense operations without prior coalition approval, as long as they reported their actions afterward. It was an unprecedented concession, but the political reality left the council with no choice. When the decision was announced, it sent shockwaves through galactic politics. Never before had a single-member world been granted such autonomy. The message was clear. Earth had changed the rules, but the coalition couldn't admit that publicly. Instead, they framed it as,